Okay, this is 7th grade lesson 4.4. In this lesson, we'll be using the interest formula to find one of the variables in the formula. The standard covered in this lesson are 7RP3 and 7EE3. Out of the hardcover book, you're using pages 178 through 183, and out of the practice journal, pages 101 through 104. Okay, today we're going to review once again working with that simple interest formula. So we're going to review the parts of that. So our interest, that's the money that we end up getting paid for either the use of our money or that we have to pay for using somebody else's money. So that's what the I stands for. The principal, that's the money that we either borrow or that somebody borrowed from us. So that's that standard amount, that initial amount of money. Okay, the rate, the R, is going to be your percentage rate that you are using, and then your time is going to be your number of years over time. Now, sometimes they do modify that and change that into months, so then we'll just work off of a decimal portion of a year. So it says an account earns interest. Find the interest earned, and then find the balance of the account. So we're going to do two different things. Okay, so here we initially started out with $1,500. So I'm going to jot that off to the side. Now, we are going to earn interest on that $1,500. So we're going to act like this was a savings account. So we're going to plug in the information that we know. So our $1,500, that's our P in our formula, that's our principal. Our 4%, anytime they give us our percent, that's our rate. And then our 5 years, that would be our time. So we're going to go ahead and plug those three things into our equation up above. So our interest equals our principal, which was $1,500, times our rate. Now the rate I'm going to go ahead and write as its decimal form of 0.04, and times our time. So our time was 5 years. So now on our calculator, we're going to go ahead and just plug that information in, and that's going to tell us how much interest we earn. So 1,500 times 0.04 times 5. When I do that, I get $300. So our interest equals $300. Okay, so there was a second question that was asked, and that says find the balance of the account. So if I had $1,500 in the account initially and I didn't touch it, I left it in the account for that 5 years, I'm going to get paid $300 interest. So what would my ending balance be? This was my interest, my new balance. I'm going to just add these together. I get $1,500. They're paying me $300 to use it. So I ended up with $1,800 at the end of 5 years in that account. Okay, $1,500 of it was what I put in there. $300 of it was what the bank or whatever establishment paid me to use it. Okay, so the key thing on working with these is that you're understanding what each of the numbers is representing, and then plugging in and solving for that. In this case, we're solving for interest. Okay, so here's our next one. We have $1,800 at 6.5% interest for 30 months. So this one's kind of tricky. And here's why. We need to, first of all, when we go through to do this, let's change that into our decimal form of years. So if we were to convert that into years, well, we want to divide this by 12. Why? Because there's 12 months in a year. So if we divide that by 12, 30 divided by 12 is going to give us 2.5. So instead of thinking of it as 30 months, let's now change that to 2.5 years. Okay, so this is our principal, this is our rate, and this is our time. Okay, so we're going to plug it into this information. So our interest equals our principal was $1,800 times our rate was 6.5. So I'm going to change that to its decimal form, 2 places, so 0.065. And yes, we'll keep 3 decimals on that. Times now our number of years. Instead of 30 months, we're going to use the year format of 2.5 years. Okay, now since the interest is all by itself, we get to go ahead and just multiply out what's there. 1,800 times 0.065 times 2.5. When I do that for my interest, so my principal originally was $1,800 plus my interest. The interest I just found out was $292.50. So this was my interest. Now, to figure out my balance, remember, we're going to go ahead and add those two together. So if I take 1,800 and add it to that 292, oops. When I do that, I get $2,092.50. Okay, my interest was $292.50. My balance in my account now is $2,092.50. Okay, so let's try another one of those. Oh. Okay, so this time they did give us years, so that's the key thing. Double check to make sure that they're giving you your time in years. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to pause your video and get your equation set up for this. I'll go ahead and help you identify the pieces. So the amount of money is our principal. Our 4.6 is our R, or our rate, and our 4 years would be our time. So go ahead, pause your video, and work your way through plugging this information in and then solving for the interest as well as the balance. Okay, so you should have ended up with an interest of $308.20 and with a balance of $1,983.20, or $1,983.20. Okay, so that's working through these equations, actually solving for just interest. Now, sometimes they're going to go through and give us ones that are a little more complex. Okay, so here it says find this annual simple interest rate. So this time they want us to find the rate. That's our R. So they're going to give us all of the other information that we need. And they're telling us with the letters, the I is $24. So where I have an I, I'm going to write $24. Okay, where I have the letter P, I'm going to write $400. So 400. Okay, then I have times R normally, which I'm going to go ahead and, since I'm doing multiplying between these last three things, I'm going to put the R at the very end. Remember, when you multiply, it doesn't matter the order. So I'm going to go ahead and now put for my T the 2. So times 2 and then times R. Okay, so when I go through to solve this, let's shift this down here so I can actually write. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and I want to work to simplify. So when I simplify this out, I still have 24 on this side right now, equals, let's simplify this. We get 800, right? 400 times 2 is 800 times R. Now we're going to go ahead and get R by itself. So if we work to get R by itself, divide by 800. So we're back to a one-step equation that you guys worked back in chapter 1. Okay, so now if we take 24 divided by 800, that gives us 0.03. Now remember, they want the percentage rate, so we're going to have to change this into its percent form. This would be 3%. Okay, so sometimes they're going to have us solve for another unknown. So you're going to plug in the stuff that you know. They're going to tell you. They're going to label for you, and then you're going to solve for that missing letter. What I recommend is, if it's in this back end, write everything that you know and put whatever letter it is that they ask you to find off the back. Okay, it's just easier, simpler for you to understand it that way. Okay, so let's try another one like that. Okay, so we're gonna plug our information in. So do we know our I? Yes, it's $562.50. So we know the I, we have an equal sign. Okay, do we know the P? Yep, it's 1,500. Do we know the R? No, that's what we're trying to figure, so I'm not gonna write it yet. Do we know the T? Yes, there's our T, which was 5 years, so times 5. And now I'm gonna put the R in the back end. Okay, so our next step, we wanna simplify. So we're gonna go ahead and solve for this part of it. So 1,500 times 5. That gives us 7,500 times R equals our, 562.50. Okay, now I want to get that R by itself. So back to a one-step equation. We're going to divide by 7,500. It's gone. Divide by 7,500. So now I'm going to plug it in the way that I see it. 562.50 divided by 7,500. When I do that, I get this number, 0.075 equals R. Remember, it's percentage rate. So 2 places for our final answer would be 7.5%. Anytime it asks for the rate, we have to change it to its percent form. Okay, so that's working with just solving for another spot out of that equation. So they're having us work algebra. Okay, plug in the stuff that we know and solve for that unknown. So let's try another one. This time they're asking for the amount of time. Okay, same concept. It's just that this time we're not going to have the time given to us. We're going to solve for the time. Okay, so do we know our I? Yes, that's $30. Okay, then I have an equal sign. So I'm just substituting in. For my P, yep, I know that. It's 500. Do I know the R? Yes, my R is 3%, so I want to write that as its decimal form, 0.03. I don't know the time, so that's what I'm going to write as T. Okay, so now we're going to simplify. So we want to go ahead and get this by itself, or not by itself, but to simplify it down. So I have 30 equals 500 times 0.03 is going to give me 15. And then my T is left over. So now to get the T by itself, we're going to go ahead and divide by 15. Divide by 15. 30 divided by 15 gives us the T, or time, equals 2 years. Okay. Same thing as what we just did in the previous one. It's just that now we're solving for the time. So a different letter in that 4-letter setup. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and pause your video and get your equation for this one set up and then solve for your T. So once again, plug in the stuff that you know. Okay, you know your I, you know the P, and you know the R. So you're going to end up with your T sitting on the back end. Okay, so go ahead, pause your video and work your way through this one. Okay, for this one, you should have ended up that T equals 1.5 years. If you didn't get that, make sure that you wrote out your decimal correctly here, because I could see that maybe being one spot where people would make a mistake. So that's just working with that formula and not having to memorize 4 different formulas, but being able to substitute in and then use algebra to solve for those missing parts. Okay, so that's working the interest rate. Now, sometimes they're going to give us that in story problem format. So once again, having to go through and kind of identify the information. So it says you put $500 in the savings account. So there's our principal, right? So I'm going to label as I go. The account earns 3%. So 3%, our percentage is always our rate per year. What is the interest earned after 3 years? So there's our time. And then it also asks, what is the balance? So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my information. So this is similar to like the first ones we did on the previous slide. Okay, so do we know the interest? Do we know an I? Nope, I don't have an I written, so that's what we're solving for. Equals, the P was $500 times our percent rate was 3%, so we have to write that as 0.03. And then times our time, which was 3 years. Okay, so now see how I have I by itself, and the ones that we just got done working, we had to work to get the letter by itself. Here it is by itself. So I get to punch it on my calculator exactly the way I see it. 500 times 0.03 times 3 years. And when I do that, I just found out that my interest equals $45. So there's my answer A. For B, they want to know the balance now. Well, after 3 years, I had the $500 originally, plus I got paid the interest. So we're going to take 500, the principal, plus the $45 interest. We get $545 for our new balance. Okay, so that's just working a basic bank account, savings account, getting paid that money. Okay, these ones are a little bit more tricky because you have to be identifying what the principal is, what the rate is, what the time is. So remember, time is going to be your years or your months. This is going to be a percent. This is going to be the money that you deposited or that you borrowed. Okay, you put $500 in a savings account. The account earns 3% interest, so that's similar to the last one, but this time it's 9 months. So they changed the time on us. So we're going to have to figure that out in terms of the decimal form of a year. So if we take 9 and divide that by 12, that's going to give us our decimal form, 9 divided by 12. And most of you know that is 0.75, and some of you don't. So just punch it in as 9 divided by 12. Okay, so we're going to use actually 0.75 instead of this. Okay, so here's our principal. Percent would be our rate. This would be our time. So we're going to plug our information in. Okay, so I want you guys to go through, pause your video, and work your way through this one. So you're going to go through and find your interest for that 9 months, which we've done all of the legwork. Here's our decimal form, and that's a 0.75. And then you've got your rate and your principal there. Pause your video, work your way through, find the interest, and find the end balance after 9 months. Okay, so you should have ended up with $11.25 for your interest, and then your balance at the end was $511.25 at the end of that 9 months. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another story problem. Okay, this one they're probably going to change it up on us. How long does it take an account with a principal of $10,000, so there's our principal, to earn $570 interest, so there's our I, at a rate of 2%, so there's our R. So we're going to plug in the stuff that we know. Do we know the I? Yep, 750. Equals, do we know the P? Yes, it was 10,000. Do we know the R? Yep, that was 2%, so I'm going to write that as its decimal. And we need to figure out the time. Okay, so here's just working a story problem. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and simplify, and these we already practiced on the previous slide. We're going to go ahead and do 10,000 times 0.02, and that gives us now 200 times t. Okay, so I just got 200 for this part. So now we'll divide by 200 to get t by itself. Divide by 200. So 750 divided by 200 gives us 3.75. So that would be 3.75 years. Okay, or that'd be 3 years and 9 months if you wanted to convert that into months. Okay, you put $1,000 in an account. So there's your principal. The account earns $100 simple interest. There's our I. In 4 years, there's our T, that's our time. What is the annual percentage rate? So now we're going to plug it in. Do we know the I? Yep, that was $100. Our equal sign. Do we know the P? Yes, that was 1,000. Do we know the R? Nope, so I'm going to wait to write that down, but I know the T is 4 years. Now I'm going to write my R in the back. So now we'll simplify. I have 100 equals, that together is 4,000 times R. So now to get R by itself, we divide by 4,000. Gone, divide by 4,000. So 100 divided by 4,000 gives us R equals 0.025. Now percentage rate. Go 2 places. So our rate equals 2.5%. Okay, so I want you guys to try one now independently. Okay, so this one you're going to go ahead, and the nice thing is on this one, they did give you years, so you'll use that decimal form. So go ahead and pause your video and write up this equation, substituting in for your I, that's the interest if they give you that. Your P is your principal, or how much money was in the account. Your R would be your rate, that's what you're solving for this time, and your T is your time. So pause your video and work through this equation. I have this wrong, so just a second, I mismultiplied there. So this should have been 875. And I'm going to double check that one more time. 350 times 2.5. I must have hit a wrong button. 875. So we're going to divide here by 875. And then 17.5 divided by 875 gives me 0.02 for R. So your rate should have been 2%. I apologize for that. My finger must have hit a wrong button, but I noticed when I got down to the right, or the final answer, that it looked off from when I had practiced it a little bit earlier. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and do one more, and this is just working off of a loan. Okay, so a loan situation. This is where you go out and you borrow money. So it says you borrow $600 to buy a violin. The simple interest rate is 15%. So you borrow, if you borrow the money, that's like your principal. Okay, your simple interest rate, so there's our interest rate is 15%, there's our R. You pay off the loan after 5 years, there's our T. How much do you pay for the loan? How much money would you save if you paid it off, if you paid off the loan in 2 years? So let's go ahead and figure out what our interest is for the 5-year plan. So our interest equals our principal times our rate. So I equals P, rate is 15%, and I wrote P instead of 600. So 15% would be 0.15 times our time is 5 years. Now, if I were to go through and actually change this out, because I'm gonna go ahead and do the 2-year plan also, I'm gonna write everything, it's just that my time is gonna be 2 years. So I equals, it's still gonna be $600, I'm still gonna pay 15%, but this time I'm gonna pay it off in 2 years. Okay, so let's go through and find out how much interest we're gonna actually, how much do you pay for the loan? So let's see how much interest we end up paying for borrowing that $600. So 600 times 0.15 times 5 gives me $450. So for that $600 violin, you paid $415. Okay, $450 more. So you ended up paying what, $1,050 for that $600 violin. Now, if you paid it off in 2 years, let's see how much interest you'd pay. 600 times 0.15, take that times 2, you're only going to pay $180 in interest. So here, your violin was $1,050. In the end, by the time you paid off the loan, that's what the violin cost you. In the end, on the 2-year plan, although you had to pay more per month as you were going through that, which we didn't figure that out, but on your 2-year plan, you paid only $780 for that same $600 violin. Okay, so this is important to understand because as you get older and you go to take out a loan, maybe buying your first car, as you're old enough to get your own car, you're going to have the options to do a longer loan plan. It brings down your monthly payment, but unfortunately, you end up paying that over a longer period of time. And we can see here, there was a huge price difference for that same violin. Okay, so that's just working through using a loan. Remember, as you're working through this in this lesson, your principal is the money that either you borrowed or that you put into your account. Your rate is going to be the percentage if they give you a percentage rate. Your time should be written out in years. If they give you months, then you need to convert that into years by dividing by 12. And your interest is your I is the amount of money that they're paying you in interest, and they'll identify that as usually simple interest. So good luck with this, and just remember you're substituting and then solving for your unknown or your letter.